Hi, welcome to this DCP web tutorial. In today's tutorial, we'll be using Blender 2.82 to create a YouTube subscribe animation. Okay, the first thing we need to do is open up the web browser. We've got to download a few files. Let's just open up the web browser and we're going to go to this particular website. I'll put a link to this same icon in the YouTube description so you can download this icon. You want to download it as an SVG file. So click SVG and let's just download this. And we'll drag and drop it into here. Just read the terms and everything in here to make sure that you can use it for commercial work. I'm just using it for this test example, but let's say Creative Commons attribute, right? So let's go ahead and open up another tab. We're just going to download two of our Hdri images. So I'll put links to both of these in the YouTube description as well. We download a 4K one here, and we'll also download another 4K one here. So we've got a few different HDRI maps to work with as well. So we've got two HDRI and one SVG. Let's create two folders, one for the SVG file, and we'll create another folder in here for HDRI maps. And let's just drag and drop them into here. That's all the downloading we need to do. Let's close down the web browser. We'll close this down and let's open up Blender. So I'm using the latest version, which is 2.82a. I would strongly recommend that you download that version. If you haven't done that already, I'll put a link in the YouTube description showing you how to install Blender. Let's go ahead and click General here. I'm just going to turn on my screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing. You don't need to do that, but I'm just going to turn on screencast keys, and now you can see the key presses. As I press them, you'll see what I'm pressing down here in the bottom corner. Let's go to File, Save As, and let's just save our work. Go to my desktop and we'll have our Blender project somewhere in here. YouTube, here it is, and we'll just call this YouTube sub-01 and let's just save our work. Okay, the first thing we'll do is delete this cube. So let's click on the cube and then just hit the delete key to remove that, right? So click on it and hit the delete key on your keyboard and you'll remove that cube. We're going to leave this light source in the camera for the moment, and the first thing we want to do is import the SVG file. So go to File and we'll go to Import and import Scalable Vector Graphic SVG. Let's click that and we'll click inside the folder where we store the SVG file and we'll select that particular file that we downloaded and click Import. So when you import that, you're going to notice you can't really see anything. It's really tiny. Look, it's like super small down here. This is the little logo that we downloaded. So we want to scale that up. So let's go ahead and click on the curve here. Left click on that. Hold down the shift key and click on the other two as well. So you're selecting all three of those objects. Then you can press the letter S on your keyboard and you can start to scale out that logo. So just move your mouse to the right and you start to scale it out. Let's scale it out to something like, I don't know, this size here, for example. Yeah, we're going to probably scale it again one more time later. Let's press number 7. That takes us into the top orthographics. We're looking down at the object now, and this little yellow dot in the center here, this is the registration point or the origin, right? And we want all of our objects to rotate around the origin point. So let's go ahead and click on one of those objects. So let's click on this first one. That will be the red circle, and we'll go to Object, Set Origin, and then we want the geometry to origin. So let's select this top one, and that will place that circle in the middle of that dot, right? That's where we want the circle. So when we rotate this object, it will rotate from that origin point at the middle. Let's click on the next object, the little button shape, and do the same. Go to Object, Set Origin, Geometry to Origin, and then do the same for the triangle. Let's do that as well. You can do all three at the same time. I'm just explaining so we can now see this clearly. So if we were to click on the button, right, this button shape here, and press G to grab it and then Z, we can move that independently, right? So let's just move it up a little bit to about here. So there's a gap in between them, and then we'll click on the bottom one here, which is the triangle. Let's press the letter G to grab it, then Z, and then we can move that above as well. So now we're just separating the objects so that we can add some dimension to them. Okay, so we want to add some thickness to these objects. So let's click on the circle at the bottom here. Just left click on it, go to the modifiers here, and then go to Add Modifier and select Solidify. And when you do that, you can see the object is quite large. So in the thickness, we're going to set it to 0.0, and then we're going to add an extra 0 and then a 1 at the end. So you can see the thickness of the object now. This is probably how thick we want it to be, but we can adjust it later. Let's click on the middle object, go to add modifier, solidify, and do the same here. So it'll be 0.001, and we do the same for the little triangle at the top here. Add modifier, solidify, 0.001. So we've got all of those objects now sitting here with this thickness. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is convert all of these objects into mesh objects. So when we need to click on the triangle, for example, go to object, go to convert to mesh from curves and surfaces, right? This one here. So we select that, and then we click on the button shape, go to object, convert to mesh here, and then click on this circular shape and go to convert to a mesh here. So now they're all behaving like mesh based objects. So we go to edit mode, we can see that they're mesh based right here. Okay, so for this bottom object, we're currently in edit mode. So if I go here, I can go back into object, or I click here and go into edit mode. We need to be in edit mode so that we can move the origin point. So what we'll do is press number 1. Number 1 takes us into the front orthographic. So let's just make sure my screencast keys are on. So you see my keys. And we're in the front orthographic, right? So we press number 1 to do that. Let's press the letter A. A will select all of the vertices. Let's zoom in here, and we use the move tool. And what we want to try and do is move this object upwards and get that center point, that point right there, that little dot. We want to get that to the center of the object, right? Like about here. You can eyeball it, it's going to be perfect, but here will be pretty good. So let's go and click on object mode here. Let's move out, and we'll hold down the shift key and the middle mouse to move up to this object. Let's click it. Let's go into edit mode as well, and we'll press the letter A, and we're going to do the same here. So we just want to drag this up so that a little dot sits in the middle around here. Can you see that? That little dot right there. And then go back into object mode, click on this one, hold down the shift key and the middle mouse to move up to this object, and we'll go into edit mode again. We'll press the letter A to select all of the elements, and then we'll grab the blue arrow and drag it up here like this. You need to make sure you've got your move tool selected, right, to select those objects. Now the origin point is roughly in the center of all those objects, and when we rotate them, they'll rotate from that middle pivot point. That's quite important. Let's go back into object mode, and now we can see like our origin points are buried in the middle of these objects. You'll see that a bit clearer in the wireframe. When we select the object, you'll see that little yellow dot there. That's our origin point, right, for all of these different objects, right in the middle of the object, or roughly in the middle point. Okay, let's go to file, save. Okay, so make sure that you're in object mode at the moment, right? Object mode, click here, make sure you're in object mode. And what we want to do really is go into solid view. So we're in solid view, and let's see where these buttons are stacked, right? So what we want to do is just rotate these buttons. So let's or these objects. So let's press B to box select all of the objects, select them all, and we want to rotate them on this x-axis, this red line, right? The x-axis here. So let's press R to rotate, then X, and then type in 90, and that will rotate all of those three objects in 90 degrees. So if you click on the circle on its own, you go to the modifier here, you'll see rotation 90 here. We just did a shortcut to rotate all of the objects in one go. Let's press number 7. Number 7 will take us into the top orthographic, and we want to click on the move tool. Let's press B to box select and left click to select all those objects. Let's just make sure my screencast keys are on so you can see the key presses. Let's move all of these objects forward, and you want to try and get this red object, the back one, to sit like on this origin point here, the 3D cursor right here, yeah? Because we're going to create another object to control these. So it's really, you want to get this one as close to that origin point right there when you drag it down to the 3D cursor right here. Then you can left click to deselect everything, click on this object and move it and have it sort of sit inside of this object slightly, and then click on this one and drag it and have that one sit inside of that object slightly as well. Let's press Ctrl S to save our work. Okay, so what we want to do now is create something called an empty, and that empty will be used to control all three of these objects, but also give them the ability to be controlled separately as well. So we'll press Shift and A, and we're going to insert a let's press, let's do that, undo that, Shift and A, and we'll go to empty sphere. So we've got this sphere, we want to grow that out so that it's wider. It doesn't have to be, but I like to make it wider. So let's press S to scale, and we scale it out so that it's wider than this button shape here. So we've got this thing called an empty here. Let's drag that into this collection here. And really we should rename this. It's called SVG, some random name. Let's double click inside here and call it YouTube button. Let's give it a sensible name. Now this object here is the circle element, right? Circle. This one, let's just spell it correctly. This one here is like the button shape, so let's call this button. And this one here is the triangle. It's worth naming these objects in here because later when you come to look for them, it's going to be a problem if you're just randomly naming them, right? And this is called empty. So right now we're just going to call it 00-empty. So it sits at the top here of this little stack inside this YouTube button, right? And what we want to do is click on the empty first. So make sure the empty is selected. It will turn like this orange color or blue, this blue line orange color. Hold down the shift key, and select the button, the circle and the triangle. So the empty will remain orange and these three objects will turn red, you see. Then we'll move our mouse to the 3D viewport here. Make sure your mouse is here. Then press Control and P. Control P allows you to set the parent to objects. We want to set it to the objects. So let's click that. And you'll see everything disappears in here apart from the empty. Because now all of those three objects are contained inside of this empty. So why do we do that? Let's middle mouse click and we can rotate around. And what we want to do is just rotate. Let's say we click on this empty, we can press now R to rotate and then Z, and we can rotate the whole button, right? We can rotate that whole button, but at the same time we can click on the little button shape here. We can press R to rotate and Y, and we can rotate that element independently. So now we can control all three objects or each individual object within inside the empty. This is going to allow us to animate this button a little bit later. Okay, let's middle mouse click, and I can see a slight problem here. So we've done this slightly wrong, and sometimes I like to explain where things are wrong and how to fix them. The reason why this is done wrong, if you look at the empty shape, it's not really sitting in the center of this button. If I press from number 7 when we added it, from the top view, it looked fine, it was bang in the middle. But if we press number 3, we can see it's all the way down here, the circle. Let's click it. You can see like the origin point is here. Now, normally this wouldn't be a problem in this particular animation, but I want to show you how to fix it because it can cause a problem. So let's just do something like R to rotate, and we'll rotate on the x-axis. So if we press R to rotate X, you can see that it's rotating from this point here, right? Which is okay. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but really we'd want it to rotate from the center of this object here. So I'm not sure there's a quick way to fix this, but we will fix it. So let me show you how to unparent something first. So what we do is click on the empty, hold down the shift key and select these three objects. Move back to the 3D cursor, move your mouse to the 3D viewport and then press Alt and then P. So when you press the key Alt and P, it allows you to clear the parent. So when we clear it, you see they're all stacked back together like normal, right? So that allows us to now click on this empty and drag it up so that it's at the center of this object from this perspective. And now we just need to parent them again. So we click on the empty, hold down the shift key, click on the button, the circle and the triangle. That should be yellow, these should be red. Move your mouse cursor to the viewport, press Control and P and then do object. Now we've fixed it. So really now if we try and rotate this object, it's going to rotate correctly from all of the different axes, right? That's what we want to try and achieve. So if we were to press R to rotate and then rotate on this green line, which is the Y, R to rotate, so press R then Y, it will rotate correctly this way. And if we press R to rotate and Z, then it will rotate correctly this way as well from that center point, right? That's what we want. So let's just press the escape key. When you press R to rotate, let's say Y for example, If you don't want to confirm that, if you left click, you're going to confirm it, right? So if you press Ctrl Z, you'll undo that. But if you press R to rotate Y and then hit the escape key, it will move it back to its original position. So we made a slight mistake there, but I like to try and show mistakes and fix them rather than just, you know, skipping over it and then you don't know how to fix it later when you come to do something like this. Okay, so let's go ahead and press number 1 on our keyboard. Number one will take us into the front orthographic. We're going to click on this empty and we want to move this object upwards. So we can move all elements now using the empty, right? And we want to move it above the floor. So if we zoom into the bottom, so use the mouse wheel to zoom in, hold down the shift key and use your middle mouse to pan the canvas or pan the 3D viewport. So you hold down shift and middle mouse button, right, to move the object like this. We'll zoom right in and we want the bottom of this object to be at one block above this red line, right? So we'll click on this empty, click on the empty here, press the letter G to grab it and then Z, and then we can move it using the grab tool, and we can just shift it up so that this little bottom part here sits on this line here. So let's zoom right out. We're still in the front orthographic. If you've changed anything, just press number 1 and we'll pan the canvas across here or the 3D viewport, and we're going to press Control Alt and 0, Control Alt 0, and that moves our camera to the 3D to this perspective, our camera. So here's our camera. Let's click on it. Let's go to the object data, and inside here the X location we want to set it to 0. So let's set the X to 0. Let's just see here. All the rotations should be set to 0 except for the X rotation here. That should be set to 90, 0, 0 here. And then we can move our camera up and down. So let's just move it. Let's just set it to 0 for the second. Let's just move it backwards. And then let's move our camera upwards a bit. Just want to try and line up this button. And we're going to move it to the side, the camera, right? So roughly around here. So you can imagine our button shape is going to be here and our text is going to be here. I think this button's a little bit too big, so let's click on the empty. Let's press S to scale and we can scale our button down. I think it needs to be about this size, right? So we click on the empty, press S to scale. We can scale it bigger or smaller using the empty. So we're going to scale it to about this size. We just need to reposition it because I think this size here with the text subscribe next to it will fit in okay. So let's click on this button. Let's press number 1. Number 1 takes us back into the front orthographic. Let's zoom back into this button here, and we can use the blue arrow to drag it down, and we just get that bottom there to sit on the bottom square, right, like this. Let's left click or middle mouse click to come back out, and let's add our floor quickly. So let's press 0. 0 takes us back into the camera view. Let's press Shift and A. And we want to add a plane, right? A mesh plane. Let's see. Now let's press S to scale, and we'll scale out that plane so that it sits something like this. Really, you want to scale out the plane quite large, right? So I'm setting it to around 40 here. You see, 40 value. We may make it a bit larger later, but now we just want to add our text. So let's press Shift and A, and we'll add a text object. Text. Where are you? Here it is. Text. So we've got some text here. Let's just grab it and move it to the side. And let's press number 7. That takes us into the top orthographic. For now, let's hide this plane. Where's this plane? Here's the plane, right? And it's inside the YouTube button. And so is our text. So click on the plane, hold down the shift key and click on the text. So we select both those objects and drag them into the main collection up here. They shouldn't sit inside this button. Really, we can minimize this button and click on this collection. So anything we add should really get added to this collection. This is called plane. Really, it should be called floor. And this is our text. So text is fine. We can just call it text. Let's just zoom into this text here. And we'll press the tab key. And that takes us into edit mode. You can either press the tab key or go to object and edit mode. Let's use the backspace key to delete this and type in. Let's see, 1 minute. Let's type in subscribe. Subscribe, right? You can middle mouse click and hold down the shift button. And use the middle mouse to pan this around. So this is our text. Let's go to object mode and let's click on the text here and inside the horizontal we want to set it to center, so it centers on this origin point here, and then in the top baseline we want to set it to center here, so now our text sits in the center. We might need to fix that in a moment. Let's see. So the smart thing for us to do, I think, is let's set the font. So let's go to fonts here. Regular is set here. Let's click the open folder. As default, it's going to take you to your Windows installation of all your fonts. So you can go to the internet, download fonts if you want. You can choose them from your Windows directory. That's normally C drive, font, Windows and fonts. And inside the search, I'm going to type in Impact. And I'm going to select this Impact font here. Just double click on it and it will change the font style to Impact. And then I want to click on the character spacing and set it to 1.1, so I just want a little bit more of a gap. And then let's see, we want to rotate this object, right? So let's press R to rotate, then X, and then type in 90. So now that is facing the same direction as our button, like it's flat towards the camera. Let's click this blue arrow and drag it up. And really we want to now give it some thickness, right? So let's press number 7. That takes us into the top orthographic. Let's drag this towards this object here. I think we should really, let's try and do it this way. So let's click in here, let's click on geometry, and let's extrude, and we set that to around, I think 0.12. I think that's roughly the same thickness as the button, just slightly bigger, but that's fine. And in the depth here for the bevel, I think we set it to like 0.02. So we've got a bit of a beveled edge, so when we shine light out, it's going to catch it. The light's going to catch it. Let's press number 1. Or in fact, the smart thing for us to do, I think, is press 0. Let's see what the camera sees now. And obviously, the subscribe is very, very small. So let's go down to the size here, and let's grow that out. Let's make it big. I'm setting it to around 3.95, and then we can drag it to the side and drag it up a little bit. And I think around here, let's say around here is going to be pretty good size, right? So we can just middle mouse click and check the size here, and I think that's going to be pretty good. I think I might make this this text a bit thicker. So let's go up to the extrude here. Let's make that text a bit thicker. Let's set it to around 4. I think in theory we might be able to make this, we should be able to make these buttons a bit thicker as well. I'm not sure if we can do that now. Let's go to do we need to? Let's have a look. I don't think we really need to be fair. I think it'll be fine actually at this sort of thickness. Really, I would like the thickness of the button to be similar. So let's try and make that a bit thicker. Let's see if we can do that. Let's click on this. Let's go inside here. Make sure we're clicking on the button. Where is it? The circle, right? This circle element. So I don't think we can. We can't make it bigger here. That won't work because we added a modifier to it. So let's go to the modifier. Add modifier. Let's see if we can try and solidify it from here. So we can do that from here. So let's set it to 0.01. Let's see. I think we've got the, it's doing something pretty weird here, isn't it? So I think it's doing that to the original object. So I think we're going to have to just leave it at this size. I wanted to make that button a bit thicker, but I can't quite figure out how to do that without. Let's try again. Add modifier, solidify. So it's doing that to this object inside the original circle object. So we don't want to do that. So I don't think we can do that from here. I think it will be fine. I think because to be fair, this button's going to really get shown from a flat sort of surface. Maybe we can move it forward so it's kind of sitting in line with this text. Let's just press number 7. Let's grab our empty and let's just drag it forward a bit so it kind of sits in line with the button or the text behind it. So I think that would be fine. but I prefer for it to really sit in line down the center point. I think that'll be better. Okay, let's press 0. We're gonna have to do it that way. The only way that I think you can fix it is when we started to do the thickness using the modifier at the beginning, we should have decided to have something a bit thicker, but it doesn't matter. I think it'll be fine. You can go and learn from this, and at least you can go and modify it later or do something with it, right? Let's click on this subscribe. I think this is pretty good, but let's press number 7 or number 1. That takes us into the front orthographic. Really, we want that subscribe to be sitting, yeah, this seems to be a pretty good position. Maybe we can bring it a little bit lower. So let's click on the subscribe text. Let's press G to grab it, and then Z, and let's just move it down slightly. So about here, let's try and get that letter S to sit where this same subscribe button is, something like that. Okay, let's middle mouse click, let's move outside, and really now we want to start adding some colors to our objects. Okay, I think the smart thing for us to do next is just set up a Hdri Lighting before we add materials to the objects. Let's go into the shading here. So when we go into shading, let's just middle mouse click. It doesn't really matter what we're seeing it from this perspective, but we want to go into the world settings here, world settings. And we've got two objects here. We've got the world output and the background. Let's press Shift and A, and we'll go to shader and add another background. Let's press Shift and A, and we'll add a mix shader and drag it here so that it sits in between these two. And then we can grab this background and add it to the shader down here. And then we want to add a environmental texture. So go to texture, environmental texture here. Let's just give it a bit more space so you can see from this side. And we want to now add a mapping. So we want to go to vector, mapping here, and then go to import texture coordinates, and then import light path. So let's grab the vector and grab it and drag it here, grab the color, drag it to here, grab the generated and drag it to the vector here, and grab the is camera ray. In fact, we'll do that in a moment. Let's just explain what that does in a moment. Let's click the open button, and let's go to HDRI, and let's click this colorful studio as an example. Let's click open, and let's go to our render view up here, render view. So let's see, let's have a look here. So we can see that there in the background, but it's looking a bit, let's see, let's go to our background here, background, and let's go to the color, and let's set it to black, value. Now you can see the lighting, so like the lights up here, over here and here, the lamp and all of these lights will affect how this object is colored, right? The coloration on these objects. So there is camera ray. When you drag and put that to the factor, that will hide that background, that HDRI background in your render. So let's go to the layout, and let's go to our render view. So we've got our render view here now. Let's go to file, and let's make sure we save our work. And now we just got to decide what colors do we want these objects to be. So let's click on the button shape here. It's red already, so click on circle, and we'll go to the material. But it's got like a basic SVG map sort of map, and we don't want that. So let's close this. Let's use the minus to get rid of it. Create a new one, and let's just call it circle. Let's call it circle material. It's called circle material. Let's go to the base color and set it to red as well, just like that YouTube sort of red. And then we can do other things to this this material, right? So we can set the metallic all the way up, and we can bring the roughness down. Let's bring that roughness down, and we'll experiment with that in a moment. So for now, we'll just leave it like this. Let's just leave it like this. Let's click on that button, right click on it, and shade it smooth. Yeah, you need to right click and shade smooth on the circular button. So now you can see it's going to pick up this lighting. It's going to have like some nice shine to it. If you adjust the roughness, you don't want to go too far, but you want to adjust it so that, so if you go too far, you will actually see the HDRI map in the button, right? But if we increase our roughness to about here somewhere, we'll get some nice lighting shining off of the button, but then at least the the HDRI map won't be shown as a reflection. So we'll click on the button shape. Let's get rid of that material, SVG map. Let's get rid of that. So we're clicking on this button here. Let's click new material. Always try and label your materials, so when you come to look for them later, you know what they are. Button material. The base color is probably okay as it is, but let's set the metallic up and let's bring the roughness down on that. In fact, I think the roughness we're going to leave it at 0.5, and we're not going to make this metallic. We want this to be like a flat color, right? The button shape. I think it looks better like that, because if it's too metallic, maybe we can get away with it on this red triangle. So really we can remove that material, and we could probably just select the circle material. Let's see, and then we want to right click on this. Let's try and shade it smooth. Let's see. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Let's try that with the button. So let's click on this button. Let's right click on it, shade it smooth, and then we'll go to we've already got a button material set for it. We just made one, right? So let's try and set the metallic up, and we'll bring the roughness down a bit. Maybe not too much, maybe to about here. So that looks pretty cool. Okay, let's click on the text. So we've got a text object. Let's create new material for it. So we're in the material. Let's call that material text material, and we'll go to the base color. I want to set it to like a nice blue color, something like this. Right, and we'll give that metallic, and we'll bring down the roughness. Let's set that roughness down. So now our button will be nice and shiny and do all that good stuff. So we've got these three metallic elements. Let's click on the floor material. Where is it? Floor here. Let's give that a material. Let's call that floor for the moment, and we'll set the metallic up on this, and we'll bring down the roughness as well to probably about, I don't know, 0.2, somewhere around there, something like this. And now our floor will shine as well. Okay, so really we should really go to file, save. Let's go to file, save as. We should save maybe another version would be wise. So we've got version 2 of this YouTube button. Let's save that, and let's go to our output settings here. Let's go to output. Really in the render, I'm going to set it pretty high to like 256, and we're going to turn on the bloom. So now we get these nice little light effects, bloom effects, and we're going to turn on ambient inclusion. When we turn on ambient inclusion, we'll get shadows in between, like here. So when you turn it off and on, you can see the shadows being casted inside the buttons, and it just makes things look a bit better, right? It looks more, just makes everything look better. And then we want to turn on screen space reflections, and with our, let's see, with our screen space reflections, we want to turn off half trace, because half trace is a bit rubbish. Let's turn up our trace precision, and we'll set our max roughness to around half this value, around 254, 0.254, and that's pretty much about it. I don't think we're going to do much else. So now you can see this nice sort of shine coming off of the floor. The floor is metallic, right? So it's going to shine, reflect the other objects from here. So I think that looks pretty good. And remember, it's our HDRI map that's causing or creating this lighting. That's what's actually creating the lighting. Let's go to File, Save, and let's just check our floor material. Let's see if we can improve that in any way. I think it looks pretty good. So let's go to our floor. Let's go to the material. Now probably the wisest thing to do is in the viewport here, press 0, so you can see what the camera sees, because everything you do is based on what the camera sees, right? So when you press 0, you're going to see what the camera sees. So when we adjust the floor material like the specular, that's not really going to do much, I don't think, in this particular scene. We'll set it to a value of around, depends if there's any other light objects, because there's no real lighting in here. We've already got this one light here. It's not doing anything for us, so let's just right click on it, and let's just delete it. Let's see, I mean, it's casting this light here, you see this specular light here, but we're going to add probably a sunlight anyway, so let's delete this. We don't need it. Let's press Shift and A, and we'll add another light object, which is going to be a sunlight. So we've got this sunlight here. Let's press number 1. Number 1 will take us into the front orthographic. So let's see, in fact, this is the front here, right? So let's press number 3. Number 3 will take us into the right orthographic. And we just drag this way. Let's see, let's drag it this way. And then we'll click on this yellow handle, or this little yellow dot, and we want to rotate the sunlight so that it's facing, we can move it up a little bit as well. It doesn't really matter, but we can move it up and have the sunlight facing towards the text. So when we middle mouse click now, our sun is hitting this text, right? So when we press 0, we can see our text is illuminated much more by the sunlight. So if we were to move this sunlight, you see it doesn't really make much difference, right? It doesn't really matter too much where it's positioned. So we can leave it here. But what we can do now is go back to our settings here, and inside the bloom, we can calm down or reduce that radius for the bloom. It's too much, right? So something around here. Then we can click on the sun, go to the sunlight, and we can increase its strength or we can decrease its strength. So we can control how much light is hitting our object from the front, like this. So we'll set it to something like around, I think 0.15 is pretty good, right? Something like this. Let's press 0. That takes us back into the camera view. And with the HDRI map, if we were to click on shading, click shading here, make sure you're in your render view, and then press 0. So now we can see what the camera sees. And inside of the object here, the rotation, so we want to rotate on the z-axis. So if we were to rotate on the z-axis, we can rotate our HDRI map, and we can change like how the colors are. The way to really see this happening is to remove the factor here. There is camera ray. So if I were to remove that, you can see these yellow lights in the background, right? This is why you're seeing yellow, because these yellow lights are casting the light onto this object. So as we rotate this HDRI map, depending on where the lighting is, it's going to affect the how the lighting is in our scene, right? So let's go to the open folder, and we'll go and click on this Shanghai one and click open. Now you can see our lighting is much more different. So if we take the is camera ray and drag that over to the factor again, we'll hide the HDRI map, and now we can rotate this one and we can get a different set of colors, right? We can get some nice colors. This HDRI map I picked specifically because it's got some nice colors in it that we can use. So you can just use this rotation. You can rotate on the y-axis, you can rotate on all of these axes. But normally I'll set these values to 0, and I'll just rotate this around and try and find like this sort of color here. So you've got like these nice little pinky sort of purple colors. Let's go back into our layout, and I quite like this. I think this is looking pretty good. So we're in a position really now where we can start thinking about animating this YouTube animation, right? Let's go to File, Save, and File, Save As, and we'll save it as version 3. Okay, with the text object and the button itself, I want to move them so they're kind of buried in the ground a little bit. So we'll click on the empty and we'll drag it down so it kind of sits inside of the floor a bit like this. Alright, so it's under the floor, and we'll click on the subscribe and we'll drag that down as well so it kind of sits buried inside of the floor. We can turn off our overlays just to see what that looks like. This is the overlay button, and we just turn that off and we can see the objects buried in the ground a little bit. I think it would be nice to have them buried so that we get some nice reflections and stuff like this. So as default, our animation sequence will have a bezier applied to the keyframes. We want to remove that. So let's go to Edit, Preferences, and inside Preferences we'll click Animation, and inside the default interpolation we're going to set it to Linear. You're probably going to see bezier, applied bezier like this. We're going to set it to Linear, straight trajectory. So let's go to File, Save, and when we animate we can add our own sort of beziers or our own sort of keyframe interpolation ourselves. That's what we want to do. So we've got a few different options now. We can either work with the camera first, we can work with objects. I think we'll work with the camera. So we're going to click on this camera here, and we're going to hit the record button, this record button here, and we're going to go to the object properties, and we're going to press the letter I. First of all, really you want to work out, is this exactly where you want your camera to be positioned? Is this quite right? Do we want to bring it down a little bit? It would be nice if this YouTube subscribe was more centered out, right? So we'll click here, And on the Z axis, let's just move it up a little bit. Really, I want to try and get the subscribe text to be in the center of the screen here. So we just move the Z axis to get it into the center. So I think that's a really good position to be in on our frame. And you know, the spacing down the side here is quite even as well. So I think this is a good place to be. So we'll move our mouse cursor over the locations here and press the letter I. The letter I inserts keyframes, and we do the same for the rotation. So now we've got our keyframe rotation here. We're going to go to frame 30. On frame 30, we're going to press the letter I and the letter I here. Then we'll click this little button here, this button right next to the play backwards, this one, and that takes us back to the first keyframe. This orange represents that, let's just stretch this out a little bit. This orange represents that there's no change in the keyframes. So really we want to animate our first keyframe or move its position of the camera, and then the last keyframe will be its end position. So I want to kind of zoom between these text objects, right? So there's a few different ways to do this. Let's show you a couple of ways. Let's go to edit and let's go to preferences. And inside preferences, we're going to go to key map. And inside key map, inside the name, the search here, we're going to type in fly, F-L-Y. And we're going to click here where it says Shift and F. Yours going to say something different. We're going to click here and then press Shift and F. So that will be the shortcut key for the fly walk function, yeah? So let's click outside of here, go to File, Save, and we must make sure the camera is clicked on. So click on the camera and we'll press Shift and F. And when we press Shift and F, we can now move the camera using the keyboard. So we use W to move it forward, S to move it backwards, and then A and D to move it left and right. So we're going to press the letter W and hold it down, and we're moving the camera forward now. And we can use our mouse wheel or our mouse to move the camera left and right. So we can move it left and right, up and down, and we want to fly through these letters right here. So we're going to use W to move it forward, and we're going to move through past these objects to about this position, and then we're going to left click, and that will confirm its position. But then we're going to rotate it on the y-axis 45 degrees like this. So if we were to left click here and move, we can see what's happening now, right? We're like flying through the text like this, backwards like this. This is kind of what I want. So let's go to this, we can click this button to go to this last keyframe here. Okay, so if we were to go back and just click the play button, it looks okay, right? It looks pretty good, but we can improve that. So let's go back to the this keyframe here on keyframe 30, and we're going to go into the dope sheet. So let's click here and go into the dope sheet, and we're going to left click and select all of the keyframes. So just left click, hold down the left mouse button, select all the keyframes, and press the letter T on your keyboard, T for Tango. So we'll click T, and then these options will come up, the interpolation options, and you've got linear, Bezier, you've got all these different ones. We're going to click back here, back. Let's click that, and you see nothing really happens here, but if we go back to our 3D viewport here, and then go back and click this button to go to the first keyframe and click play, it will kind of do this bounce sort of effect, right? And it's kind of nice, it smooths it all out and everything looks nice. I quite like it here, like this. So here we can see it a bit slower, it kind of overcompensates and then comes back in, sort of bounces like this. I think that's kind of a nice effect to have. Okay, so we want to animate this button shape. So let's go ahead and click on the empty. We're on frame 30 and we've got the record button. So let's press the letter I here and the letter I here. And this is really where our end frame will be for our object. So let's move forward 60 frames or to frame 60 here, and press the letter I here and the letter I here. So at the moment the object is not moving at all. So we get to frame 30, let's drag this object backwards so that it's off the screen or off the camera view. So right now we can see that the object does get seen at this point, and we don't really want that. So what we'll do is select this object or select this keyframe only, copy it, so right click, copy. Let's go back to the very first frame and then just right click and paste it. So now we just need to make sure that that object doesn't get seen. So let's just click it on this 30 keyframe, right? So click on the empty, on frame 30. Let's just move it backwards a little bit more, and let's just see, it kind of almost gets seen, right? So let's move it back slightly more so that we never see it during this sequence, and then it will start to come in. So let's just select this keyframe, right click, copy it one more time, go to this keyframe, delete it, move the timeline to the first frame, and then right click and paste it here. So now we won't see that object is off the camera view. So make sure you're looking at camera view, right? Make sure you press 0 so you see the camera view, and then we want it to slide in. But when it gets to this point here, we want to rotate it as well. So let's go to the rotation, and we want to rotate it on the Y axis. So on Y, we'll set it to 360 degrees, 360. So if we move back now, our button will roll in like this. And let's see, let's go to our dope sheet, and our button here, let's see, this is our empty at the top, right? So we're going to select these keyframes here, these ones here. Let's just make sure we only select those ones, right? So let's see, yep, these ones right here, these 4 at the top here, and we'll press the letter T, and we're going to select bounce here, bounce. Let's go back to our 3D viewport. Let's go back, and it's going to kind of hit and bounce, right? But we need to move this a little bit forward. So if let's just play it out and see what it looks like. Let's click play, and it will roll in and bounce like this. But we need to move it closer. So we'll go to frame 60, and let's just move it so that it's almost intersecting with our text here. So let's press number 7. We can see it a bit clearer. Let's drag it in so that it kind of overlaps inside of our text. Then we'll press 0, so it's kind of hitting the text and bouncing away now, right? Let's go back here and click play. Let's go back to the first frame and click play, and we'll see our button roll in and kind of bounce and hit here. So really, let's just see, that's probably a bit too, let's see, we want to improve that, right? So let's press 7. I think it's a bit too close. So we're going to move this back a bit. Let's say about here. Let's see how that looks. I think that's going to be better. So let's just check it. Let's play again. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. We'll work with the camera in a moment. So let's do something a bit more interesting. So at the moment we only got one camera. Here's our camera. Let's go back to the first frame for our camera here. So click on this camera, go back to the very first frame, go to the marker, and let's add a marker here. So we're going to add this marker, then we're going to go back to marker, and we're going to select bind camera to marker here. So this camera now will be active for this particular marker. So when it gets to frame 30, I want to switch the camera to a different, it's almost like a jump cut, right? Think of it that way. And what we'll do is add a new camera. So let's press Shift and A, and let's add a new camera. Shift and A, and add a new camera here. So we've got a new camera. Let's click on that camera. On frame 30, we're going to add another marker, add marker. And we're going to go to marker, and we're going to bind to this camera. And you can see it's going to be all close and not really looking too great. So let's press let's on this Z axis, click on the camera. On the Z, let's just move that camera. So in the Y, let's move the camera backwards. Z, let's move it upwards. And let's rotate the camera on the Y. Not on the Y, on the Z. Let's just rotate it around this way. And then we can, on the X, we can move it backwards a bit to around here. Like around here, I think would be good. So our camera is going to switch to this position, right? Like this. So we've got our first camera on frame 30, it will switch to this position. So between frame 30 and frame 60, we want to add some keyframes. So let's go to frame 30, where our camera is on frame 30 for the second camera. And we'll press the letter I here and the letter I here. That inserts keyframes for this camera. And we're going to go to frame 60. frame 60, and we'll press the letter I here and the letter I here. Now we can use the fly tool, so we'll press Shift and F, and we can use A, S, W and D. So W will move it forward, S will move it backwards, D will move it to the right, and S will move it to the left, a bit like when you're playing games, right, on a computer. And then we can also use our mouse wheel to rotate the camera. So we're just going to rotate it around sort of this direction, not too much, to something like here, about here. And we're going to cut through this letter C like we had on the first frame. So when we go to the first frame, we can see we cut through the letter C here. And as this camera will move, it will kind of move like this, right? And then we can decide what we're going to do. So we're going to go to frame 90. On frame 90, we'll press the letter I here and the letter I here, insert keyframes. On the Y, let's see, the Y rotation, we want to set that to 0. Let's set that to 0. In fact, on this Y rotation, on frame 60, we should also set that to a value of 0. And let's go to frame 30. Frame 30 is already set to 0. So let's rotate around. And then on frame 90, we can decide what we want to do. And we're probably going to, let's see. I think we're going to move back so that we can see the subscribe text again, right? So Z is up and down, so it's probably correct here. Y is going to be our backwards and forwards, and we need to rotate really this Z around to 0. Let's set it to 0, and then on the X we can set that value to 0, and then let's move our camera backwards. Let's move it backwards, and then on X let's move it across, so we kind of get this angle here, and maybe we'll move it up slightly to about here. So we can see the other camera. This is our new camera that we're looking through, right? So we're really going to move around. It's going to switch camera. It's going to rotate around like this. And as it rotates around, I want to do something with the these elements on this button. So we might do that here. I'm not sure, or we can do it here. I think we should do it here, right? So on frame 60, let's go ahead and click on the button shape here, this button shape. And let's press number 7. Number 7 takes us into the top orthographic, right? And we can see our two different cameras. Right now, this is the camera that we're working with. I believe actually it's this one over here. If we click camera, we can see this is the second camera here. We're going to click on the button shape, and we want to add a keyframe here. So let's press the letter I and the letter I here. And let's go back to the first frame, and let's press the letter I and the letter I here. Let's move that button all the way out of the camera view. Let's move it to around here somewhere, so the camera won't be able to see it. This camera can't see this little button shape here, right? Probably about here will be fine. And let's just right click. Let's just copy that keyframe, this one. Let's click here. Left click outside, so you deselect everything. Click on this keyframe on frame 60. Let's move it to frame 60. Let's move our cursor to here on frame 60. Let's see. On frame 60, let's right click and delete this keyframe, and then just right click and paste it. So now our button will be static in that position, right? You can see that it's not moving. It will move with the object because it's moving with the empty, but it will still be outside the camera view. So if we press 0, we'll see our button shape, right? And it's going to roll in. And I think as it rolls in, it's going to get to here. Let's have a little think about this, right? So maybe what we'll do, you can see the button moving in now at this position, right? So I'm thinking whether it will be wise for us to have that. Yeah, we don't really want it to move in while that button is bouncing. It's not going to look right. So what we'll do is we'll do the animation from here. So the button flies in like this, but I really want it to rotate as well. So on this keyframe, we're at 119. Let's set it to let's set it to about 80. No, let's set it to around 90. 90 here. Let's drag this keyframe to 90. Let's undo that. Let 1 second. It was at 119. We need to left click to deselect, then take this keyframe and drag it to 90 here. 90, and then on the rotation for the Y, we're going to set it to 360. So in theory, we should have our button flying, rotating like this, right? And then we can do something similar with the little triangle. So let's try and replicate that for the triangle or something similar. So let's click on the triangle object. Really, this is our end position. This is where we want our last. In fact, we're going to stagger this a little bit, right? So let's set it to 110. Let's press the letter I here and the letter I here. And let's go all the way to frame 1. And let's press the letter I here and the letter I here. And what we'll do is press number 7. Number 7 on our keyboard. And we can see where the button object is. So our triangle, we just want to grab it. Let's think about this carefully before we do this. We probably should add, let's click on the triangle. We should probably add, let's see where our button was. Our button's on frame 50, right? So let's go to our triangle. Let's go to frame 50 or keyframe 50 here. And let's press the letter I here and the letter I here. I think so. And let's go to frame 1 here. And we'll drag this button so it sits a little bit behind, or this triangle so it sits a little bit behind the button. And then we can just, the easy way to do this I guess is just click on this keyframe, copy it. Let's copy this, right click, copy. Let's go to frame 50, click on this keyframe, delete it, and then right click and paste it. So our button will be in that position like the other, or the triangle will be in that position, but it's going to be slowed down, right? It's staggering. So on this frame here, we just want to rotate that button or that triangle 360 degrees. So let's just press N. Let's just make sure my screencast keys are on. And let's press 0. And if we grab our timeline now and drag across, we'll see the button and then the triangle flying afterwards, like this. That's kind of what we wanted to, well, what I would like to achieve. And then we can do what we want from this position, right? So we're on frame 110. Let's just play it out. So when I'm not really working with objects, I turn off the record button in case I click something, I start adding keyframes that I don't need. And we can just hit the space bar and we can see the button animation like this. I think that looks pretty good. And then we can just decide from frame 110, what do we do with the camera? Maybe, let's just see, right about here, everything is very static, right? So if we go, we can see we're ending our animation on frame 110 for the triangle. So what we could do is go to our camera, and we can see the camera finishes on frame 90. So we could just drag this, let's undo that. Let's left click, click outside to deselect the keyframes. Click on this keyframe, and let's just double check triangle finishes on frame 110, right? 110 here. So let's click on the camera, and we'll click on this keyframe and end that on 110. So we've still got movement in our scene while this button is animating, right? Like here. So I think what we'll do is let's go to our dope sheet, and inside the dope sheet for the second camera, which is this one here, we want to, let's see, this will be the transform here, right? So let's just see. Between these keyframes here, this action keyframe, this is its location, right? So these keyframes here, these ones here, we can press the letter T, and then we can select something else. We can select elastic, bounce, back, we can circle, we can pick these and see which ones we like, right? So let's try back here for now, back. And we'll go back to our 3D viewport. Let's just see. Let's play it out. It will kind of do this, right? Let's pause this. So you can see it's like it's going over and then it's bouncing back, right? Let's try something else. Let's just experiment. Let's go to back to the dope sheet. And we'll select those keyframes are already selected, but let's just make sure we only select those ones, like here. And we will go to press the letter T on our keyboard, and we can select maybe elastic, or we can try some of these other ones. Let's try quadratic. Let's see, quadratic. Let's go back to our 3D viewport, and let's just play it here. So that's quite harsh at the end. I don't like that. So you need to experiment with this. This is how you learn stuff, right? So the keyframe's already selected, so let's press letter T, and we can do a bezier. Let's do a circle. There's all these different options in here, but maybe we'll stick with let's see what elastic happens, right? It might bounce and do a few things. Let's do elastic, and let's go to 3D viewport. Let's click here to go back and click play. Right, that's doing some craziness. We don't want that. So let's go back to our dope sheet. They're already selected. Let's press the letter T, and I think we'll stick with the let's stick with a bezier, right? Bezier. Let's try that. Let's go back here. It should just smooth in and out now. Yeah, and I think that's fine. And now all I'm going to do is go to probably frame, let's see, 110 to about 30 frames, right? So 140. Let's go to frame 140. Let's hit the record button, and we're going to animate this camera. Really, we can hide the other camera for the moment because it's kind of overlaying. We can just hide it to get it out of the way. And all we want to do is fly back through the text to finish off this sequence. We're going to add a few particles afterwards, some particle animation. Maybe we should do that now. Let's just see. Really what I want is when this button hits the circle, I want some particles to fly out, right? So let's do that now. I think it would be wise. Let's turn off the record button. Let's click on this button here, this little button shape. Let's go to frame 190. That's where it kind of finishes the animation. We'll click on the button shape. Let's press Control and D, is it? Let's see. I think it's Shift and D. Shift and D. That will duplicate. Shift D will duplicate this button. Press the Escape key, and that will place the button exactly where the previous button was. And you'll see there's two buttons now, right? Let's drag this button 001 out into the collection here, and let's call this particle emitter. And we should really save our work, right? Let's see what's going on here. Particle emitter. I think it's behaving part of this empty, right? Which shouldn't be a problem really. It should be okay, because we're going to animate our particles at a certain point. So even though it's inside this empty still, it doesn't really matter. So let's see. So I assume it's inherited. This particle. In fact, it might be interesting, maybe quite interesting, if as this button's flying over, the particles are being emitted as it's flying, right? That would be pretty cool. So let's just check one thing. Let's hide the original button. We'll just hide it from the scene so that we can make sure that this is our particle button here, and it's still inherited all of the animation sequence, which is good for us. So we can turn this camera back on for the moment. Let's click on this particle emitter. So really we're going to treat this as an emitter now. So we need to make some particles. Let's middle mouse click to go back into user perspective, and we're going to press Shift and A, and we're going to insert an object. And I think we'll use we can use spheres, we can use cubes, we can use any sort of shape, right? But I think I'm going to use cubes. So we're going to click cube. Here's our cube, and we want to press S to scale it down. Let's just make it smaller. This sort of size should be fine here. And I think it will be nice that the particles are red. So let's click on this cube, Let's go to the material, and in this drop down we'll select the circle material. So it's going to inherit the circle material, and we want to turn this button, this version of this button, into an emitter. So let's go to the particle emitter here. Hopefully, yeah, it shouldn't affect the other one. So let's click on this particle emitter. Let's go to particles, the particle system. Let's add one, and now we can see particles from this button, right? You can see it's going to create this trail of particles, which is pretty cool, like this. But we want those particles to be this red square or cube. So let's go to our render settings, and inside our render settings we want to change it from halo to object, and we want to set the instance of the object to this cube. Where is the cube? Let's see. Might be wise. Here's the cube, right? But it's called a cube and it's not a cube. It's here. This is called a cube, but let's call it a particle. Let's call it a particle. Let's click back on the button, which is actually the emitter, right? It's going to actually be the emitter. So make sure a particle emitter is selected here. Then we can go down to select object here, and then in the instance we'll select our particle. Now we can see the square particles. Let's increase their scale a little bit, and we should really see this from the camera perspective. Now we can see it from the camera perspective, and let's set it to random scales. So some will be large, some will be small. Let's set them numbers to around 5,000 particles. Let's just go back here, and let's just see like this. Now let's see. I think it would be nice if we could see more of those particles as they're moving across, because right now they're emitting particles here, right, and we don't really see that from the camera. So let's go to our camera one. Let's see. So our camera one is really showing this sort of bounce here, right? So we really want to retain that, but what we could do, let's see, I think it will be fine actually. Let's zoom in, let's see. Yeah, I think that's going to be fine. We'll leave the camera as it is. We could zoom out a little bit so we can see more of the this particle emitter flowing in, but I think it's fine from here because I really want to see that sort of bounce of the button, right? That's really what I wanted to emphasize on this camera view. We could switch to a different camera, but I think it'll be fine. So really we just need to now go back to our particle emitter. Let's click on particle emitter. Let's see what's going on with this particle emitter. So really, let's think about this. We want the particles to probably stop emitting at around frame 100, something like this, maybe. Let's think. Or probably on frame 90, we want all of our particles to be emitted, right? Let's go to the top here. The start frame is at frame 1. The end frame will be at frame 90. Let's set it to frame 90, and we'll maybe set the particles to last for 40 frames. So if we go back now, our particles will stop emitting here, right, at this point, and it'll last for 40 more frames. So you can see this red line stops here because that's on 40 frames. That's where the very last particle will be emitted. Now, what would be nice is that these particles bounce off of the floor. And we can add a bit of randomization to this, right? These particle trajectories. It might be nice if they're just straight like this. Let's see. So what we'll do is click on the floor. So make sure the floor is selected and go to the physics and set it to a collision. Here, collision. So if we go back now and click play, our particles will bounce on the floor, which will be good. And I think we'll do something similar, maybe with the triangle as well, but maybe those can be white particles because the red who's already been used here. We could even change the color of these particles, right? Maybe we can make them blue so they stand out more against this red object. So what we could do is click on the square, go to the material. Let's remove this material, remove it. We'll create a new material. Let's call it particle material. Because at the moment the red, and you can see it white and now it's kind of standing out a bit, but if it was blue then it will completely stand out the particles from the red objects and all the other objects, right? So if we call it particle material, let's click here and we make them like a sort of a blue color. Let's say something like this. Let's set this metallic high and let's bring down the roughness. Or what would be even more interesting if they glowed, right? If they were glowing particles. So maybe we'll make them glowing cubes. So let's go to the principal BDFS and let's set it to an emission shader. And let's set it to a blue color, like quite a bright blue color. Something like this. Something not too similar to the blue text, but something a bit different. And let's set the strength to maybe around 10. So now we've got these blue glowing particles that will flow across like this, right? And that looks pretty cool. So nice. Okay, so I want to do something similar with this triangle object because it's floating through, but maybe we'll make the triangle a different color of object and manipulate that separately, right? So I think what we'll do is duplicate the triangle first. So let's go to our triangle. Where is our triangle? Here it is. Let's press Shift and D to duplicate it. Shift D. And now we've got two triangle objects, but press Escape to move it to the same position. And let's grab this triangle, 001 triangle, and drag it. What we have to do is expand this a little bit. Let's just expand it slightly so we can drag it into the main collection. And this one's called Particle Emitter. Let's call it Particle Emitter Button. And let's call this other one the triangle one. In fact, we can just double click here, copy this name. We can just double click, press Ctrl C to copy, double click here. Let's delete that and let's call it particle. I'm doing this a bit long way. Let's cut this particle emitter triangle. Right, so this will be our triangle particle emitter. And now we need to create an object for it. And we could use the what's it called, the square as well, right? But it'd be nice if we could make a triangle shape, because these ones are square and it's kind of a square button sort of thing. Maybe we could manipulate this, stretch it out so it's more wide. So what we could do is click on this particle. Let's call this particle square. Let's call it particle button, right? Because it's the button particle. And maybe what we'll do is go to the material, or go to its data, and we want to stretch it on the x-axis, right? Let's just make it a bit wider and make it a bit taller. Let's see, taller will be on Z, like around here. It's kind of roughly the same shape as this button here. Maybe we need to make it a bit more squared out, something like this. Let's see if that's going to be okay. Like that, right? It seems a bit big though in here, right? So if we get to around here, we can see the shape, but the shape's quite large. So what we do is go to our particle emitter button. Let's go to the particle system and we can scale it down. Let's scale them down. They don't need to be that big. Probably about 0.6. We can turn off our overlays just to see what's going on here. And I want this triangle shape now to follow, but maybe with a different color. We might stagger this triangle a bit more so it flows in like a bit later, but we'll work that out afterwards, our keyframing. So let's go to the particle triangle, and we want to add a particle system to this one as well. For now, we'll just use this object and we'll switch that object out afterwards. So let's go to add a new particle system. We'll set that one to maybe 2,500. It doesn't need as many particles, but We'll set our start frame and end frame. We'll work that out in a moment. I think we should set it to 110 because that's where the animation ends for that. So let's set it to end frame 110. And you can start on the first frame, that doesn't matter. And we'll set it to roughly, let's set it to a lower value. The other one was 40. Let's set this one to 30 frames. Each particle will last. We'll go to the halo. Let's go to object. And for now, we'll use the, we could in theory use the, let's see, the triangle itself, use itself as a particle. Alright, let's see how that looks. So we're using the triangle itself, but I really want these to glow. So what we could do is click on this triangle here. Let's duplicate it, and then let's change its material and turn that into, in theory we should be able to, or maybe we should create a new one. Let's think about this. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new particle. We'll create our own object to, we won't use these red ones here, we want them to glow. So we'll create a new triangle object. So let's press Shift and A. Let's just make sure my screencast keys are on. And we'll press Shift A and insert a mesh cylinder. Let's see, yeah, a mesh cylinder. So we've got a cylinder here, and we'll click on this option down here, and we'll set the vertices to a value of 3. So if we click on the blue arrow to drag this object up, make sure you've got your move tool on. Now we've got this triangle shape object. Let's go to the object data. Let's rotate it 90 degrees so we can see it now. It's a triangle shape. Let's middle mouse click, and we can see it's quite wide. So we want to try and get the thickness down, so that will be scaling on the Z. So let's scale it down to around this sort of size. It's kind of similar to the block above. What is that set to? That's set to 0.339, and this is set to 0.3. So it's roughly the same. It doesn't really matter too much. Let's click on this triangle object. Let's go to the material. Let's create a new material, and this will be, let's call this triangle particle. Let's copy that word triangle particle. Let's press Ctrl C to copy. Go to this cylinder and name it triangle particle. That's what it is. And we'll go to the principal shader. So make sure triangle particle is selected. Go to the principal shader. Let's go to the emission. And on the last object we created, the button particle, we set it to a value of 10 and blue. So let's click on this triangle. Let's set it to a, maybe we'll do, I don't know, let's see. What color should we make it? Maybe make it green, yellow. We don't really want it to be red. That's kind of the key. Maybe we'll try like this pink sort of color. Let's see. We'll give it a value of 10. So now it's glowing. And we want to apply that object to the particle system for this particle emitter triangle. So let's click on that. And we'll go down to the particle settings. And for the object, instead of selecting triangle, we will select now particle, where is it, triangle. So let's scroll down, use the mouse wheel to scroll up and down, and we'll select triangle particle. Now they're pink sort of color, right? Let's just press 0 on our keyboard so we can see the camera view, and then we can kind of see the trail here, and we can decide do we want it to be pink, red, green, blue. Let's try and see it from around here. Here's a good position. Let's click on the triangle object here. Let's go to its material, and then we can change the color. Let's see what works well. Maybe 2 shades of blue, maybe a darker blue and a lighter blue. Maybe we can go for red. Maybe red and blue, right? That kind of works well. Maybe something like this. Let's go back, because then our red and blue are contrasting, right? But I think this needs to be staggered a bit, because our they're kind of merging together. I don't mind that, but let's see. Let's go to our, where are we? We want to go to our, in fact, we'll probably leave this. I think that's that's going to be pretty good for us. Otherwise we're going to have to do a lot of work moving our keyframes. Which I don't think we need to do. So I think we're in a pretty good place. So let's click, this object's already selected, this one. Let's hold down the shift key and select both of these objects. Let's use our mouse wheel to zoom right out. This is what our camera sees. Let's take these objects and move them out of the scene. So now they won't be seen in our camera view. Let's zoom out here. Or let's move our keyframes here. We've got this, this and this. I think it's looking pretty good. And now we just want to do our final camera animation to maybe let's see, we just want to fly back through this object, right? Maybe just before these particles disappear. So let's say around here. Let's see, our camera rotation ends at 110 probably. Let's click on it. It ends on 110. Let's hit the record button. Let's go to frame 140 and we'll go to the object data. Let's press the letter I here and the letter I here. Let's use our fly camera. Let's press Shift and F. Shift F will allow us to use the fly camera. So let's move our mouse cursor towards the center of the screen, like around here. Let's press Shift and F and then press W. Hold down the W key. Just hold it down and we can fly through. You can rotate your mouse wheel upwards to speed and use your mouse wheel backwards to slow it down. And we're going to get past this object, past here, and then we're just going to left click to confirm that, and we're going to set our rotation for the camera to minus 45 degrees, minus 45, so then it will fly back through this way. So on the first one it rotates positive 45, it will do the bounce, it will do this, this will all fly in, and then it's going to rotate out before the particles finish, which I think is probably going to be good. We can adjust this keyframe, this last one, we can move it to like frame 160. It's down to whether we can either not worry about the particles not finishing, or we can reduce their lifetime. We can do a few things to make sure all the particles are finished in this before the camera moves past. We can either stretch these keyframes or reduce the lifetime of the particle, or reduce how many are emitted. There's quite a few things we can do. So let's go to the particle button. Here's our particle button. Let's go to the particle settings and we can end the keyframe earlier. So we can maybe end it on, let's say it's on 90 right now, the last particle to be emitted. So let's set that to something like 60. And if we set that to 60, in theory, yeah, our particles will end sooner. They'll end on frame 100 here, but they last for 40 frames. So 100 plus 40 will be 140. So really this is where the last particle will be displayed. So let's set the 40 frame here to something like 20. And let's see what happens now. I think that's going to be okay for our, let's see, something ain't right here. Let's go to here. Maybe let's save this first. Let's see, because our particles are not emitting no more, right, from this object. So let's set this back to 40. We might need to bake this, right, to see it properly. Okay. Right, so we can't do that because our particles have finished all the way over here, the blue ones. So let's set this back to 90. Set this end value back to 90. So now we can see the particles, right, here. But they end too soon, so let's see. Let's try and bake this first. Let's go to Don't think we have to bake it anymore. Render, cache here. Let's bake all dynamics. This will memorize where those particles are, so now we can see it properly, right? Yeah, that's pretty good for the blue one, right? We can see that by the time we get here, all of those blue particles are finished. So let's try and do something with this red emitter particle settings. Let's delete the bake so we can adjust it. So delete the bake, and let's clear the current bake cache as well. Let's just delete it. So we've got 2,500 particles. They end on 110 frames. So the particles are still being emitted on frame 110, and they last 30 frames. So 140 would be the very last frame. So we can probably reduce the lifetime to something like 20 frames, and let's see. Yeah, that should do the trick. So let's go to bake all dynamics. So we baked the keyframes. Let's untick the record button. Let's click play. I think we're pretty good. Let's see. Let's just play it out one more time. Okay, I think that's pretty good. Let's pause this. Let's get to a frame where we can see everything quite clearly. Let's say around frame 110. Let's go to our sun object. Let's go to the sunlight, and maybe we'll brighten this up a bit because I think it's a bit dark. You can go crazy. I think around here should be pretty good, around 550. And I think that's going to be pretty good. We want to leave shadows on as well. Let's go to our output settings. Let's see. I think we'll increase the bloom slightly. Let's just go back here. So I think that's pretty good. So the last thing we can do is go to our shading. Let's go into our world settings, and we can rotate our HDRI map and see if we can find some better colors for our scene, some better lighting. So I think around here we've got quite a few variations of colors. We've got pinks and blues and yellows. Seems to look quite nice. Let's just turn off our overlays. The overlay is already off. Let's just left click to deselect all our objects. I think this is pretty good. Yep, I'm quite happy with that. So I know what you think. Let's go and do a test render. Let's render it all out and see what it looks like. Let's go to File, Save. Let's go to our output settings, and we are, let's see, we're on 100 and I think 150, 160, right? Let's double check that. Let's click on the camera, and we can see our frames in 160. So let's set the end frame here to 160. And that will automatically set our last frame on our render to 160. We're going to render at 30 frames a second, which is pretty good frame rate. Let's see. That should be pretty good. And this will be our last frame, right? What it looks like. So you can do something else with this. You could rotate it back so the line is flat. You can leave it like that. It's up to you, right? What you do on this particular end frame. I'm going to leave it like that for now. In the PNG, I'm going to set it to AVI JPEG. Let's click on the output, and we're going to go to my desktop. Let's go to our YouTube animation, and we just click, we can give it a file name. Let's call it YouTube sub animation -01. Let's accept that, and all we've got to do is press Ctrl F12 Control and hold down the Control key and press F12. So now Blender's going to go and render out each individual frame across our sequence. So that's going to take some time. So I'm going to pause the video and we'll come back and check the final animation once it's done. Okay, so Blender's finished rendering out all of the 160 keyframes. Let's close this window. Let's go to File, Save, and let's minimize this. So inside this folder on my desktop, we've got an AVI file. Let's double click that and let's see what it looks like. Okay, so I think the animation turned out pretty well. It looks pretty good. You can now go and experiment with this tutorial, go and make it your own version. It doesn't have to be a YouTube button. You could do a subscription for like, or follow us on Facebook. You can use the same technique for all different types of social media. Go and make it your own, go and experiment and play around with the the Blender settings and the tools and the animation and the sequencing. But you've learned quite a lot in this tutorial, so I hope you find it useful and I look forward to seeing you in the next DCP web tutorial.